Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
It's so fun when you feel like an investment has been dragged out of your hands. At the end of our deployment of our first fund, I was adamant that our final investments had to be blindingly obvious because the next best use of funds was to give more capital to companies we already knew were amazing. So when I met Shane Dyer, CEO of Irrigreen, the quality could not have been more obvious. He was a multitime founder operating at a seriously high level, building around a product that was an absurdly large improvement on the status quo, and which had the potential to save billions of gallons of water. It's been such a pleasure to watch him work, and it was deeply exciting to invest in them again as the third position in our opportunity fund. Please enjoy my conversation with Shane Dyer. Shane, it is really excellent to see you. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Absolutely delighted to be here. We've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad we finally pinned it down, and
isn't it right?
Excited for this conversation.
It has been, I think, a record-setting game of calendar hopscotch, which is really...
Well, mostly my fault, I think. I'm sorry.
And equally fun, I think we can both agree. So we've got you here. You hold a really interesting position in terms of the Burnt Islanders, in that I think you are certainly, if not the most serial of serial entrepreneurs. And you also came from outside the sector and came into it, and you found yourself an opportunity, a very specific and an individual opportunity, which we'll go into later. So why did you choose water, or did water choose you? And how do you think about it now that you're 5 years into that journey? Maybe the contrast between how you appraised the opportunity going in and how you see it now.
Yeah, I think for me, water, if you looked at sort of like, climate tech in general, it seemed to me that water tech was just getting less focus from some of the greatest minds that were out there. And I think that it seemed like such an opportunity to kind of apply, a lot of the things that I'd kind of learned in my background in IoT and in starting companies and things like that to really kind of attack that water problem. And at the end of the day, it sort of seemed like there were more solutions on the horizon for energy tech in terms of clean tech and electric cars and things like that as well, where it's like, I kind of believe that's going to be solved. And water was not that way. It's like, you call the thing the fundamental molecule. It's like, we really are like significantly behind on having the technology solutions to really address water. So I think that's what made it a really fascinating problem for me.
Do you feel like you were right as you look at it now after multiple years?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, obviously a lot to learn. We've been on a 6-year journey now, learning about water and where we fit in and what the ecosystem looks like and the incentives and the other pieces for that. So I think, it's fascinating. I am still consider myself very much a student in water, but it's also been really helpful to be that outsider as well and to kind of take things that we've learned in other parts of the tech sector and I kind of apply here.
Do you have a couple of examples of that you've been particularly effective? Because I've seen you do, I couldn't agree more. It's one of those things where you bring in your experience, particularly as an IoT founder, 3 times. Like anything that you would particularly draw out?
Yeah, like in particular, if you look at sort of like the sophistication of kind of, Sean Ellis style growth marketing used by firms that are in water tech, particularly if they're selling to SMB or to consumer or, other places like that, I think taking some of that very best sort of sales and marketing know-how and applying that to water tech is incredibly powerful. Gives you superpowers that a lot of maybe the incumbent players in that space have not fully embraced. So that's one example of it. And I think the other example is like thinking about how information technology and the very best, sort of IoT and other solutions have been applied in things like smartphones and in connected home and areas like that, applying that to water tech in a way that really helps accelerate. So both the technology pieces themselves, but also the ways we think about go to market and the ways we think about building these businesses at scale, I think are areas that we all need if water conservation and thinking about water more intelligently are going to be solved problems eventually.
I couldn't agree more. And we are going to get back to the growth marketing thing. I should have been like, wait, pause. We've got the Sean Ellis style growth marketing. We've got to go and define what that means. But we will get back to it because it's a particularly powerful superpower of yours. So as you came into this with your entrepreneurial experiences under your belt, what is it that you felt most equipped to do? Describe to us how you felt in terms of your confidence taking on a new sector. How did you feel equipped after having these previous founding experiences already there? Well, I'm really interested in this idea of what experience feels like. Does it still feel as risky? Did you feel like, wow, okay, this is a rabbit hole that I'm going to go down for the first time? Like, how did it feel as you were embarking on the Irrigreen journey?
I mean, I think what is experience? Experience is like you have those little hairs on your back of your neck come up a little bit while you're in a design review and you go, yeah, I think we may have a landmine here in front of us. Do you see if there's a little bit more of that? I think you can come in with lots of different kinds of experience. My experience is very much on the product side. That's where I've always been. I'm an engineer by trade. And then thinking about, really where products engage with markets. And so I think that part was, something where, my last company, we had done like 60 IoT products before. And so like having that sort of discipline of, what do they look like? How will they engage with customers? What will work? What won't work? Tons of mistakes. Those sorts of things were incredibly helpful in crafting like our product for Irrigreen, our, sort of this robotic digital sprinkler system that prints water using about half the water for the same landscaping growth. What's difficult about it is great products in new markets are always going to be difficult. Getting product market fit. For us, we're trying to create these robots that run in the mud for like 10 years. So reliability and, all the gritty parts of building robotic products are very much there. And that's never going to be easy. But I think there's a little bit of experience you can bring that really helps in terms of like building teams and what it takes to be successful there in running those teams. Those are the areas where, having maybe seen the movie a couple times provides some advantage.
So on the building team side of things, because you really have been remarkably adept, is there anything kind of counterintuitive or even just kind of deceptively simple that you would say is like kind of a few critical ingredients that you've seen about making a group of people work together really exceptionally?
I think the two major things is really understanding what the company needs at its current stage for the next 12 to 18 months. I find that especially the first time I was hiring, I didn't really articulate that. And I would get wowed by someone's resume and the fact that they were, even willing to talk to me when I was a startup or something else like that. And so I think really being critical on what does this job need to get done to move us forward during this particular period of time and for startups, you really have to focus on that 18-month, maybe 2 years. If you don't get that done, there is no future beyond that.
Exactly.
So it's like that's where you need to be kind of lined up on. And then I think the second thing is understanding that startups are not little big companies. They're a completely different experience. And really sort of matching the ambitions and the talent and the grit. And maybe that last one, that grit part is the most important to decide, okay, who is really going to be able to excel at this role, given that it's in a incredibly undefined environment compared to another company or another company role that they could consider taking.
No question. I want to think about they're not little big companies for a long time. I've never heard that phrase before. That's really profound. So just take us back to 6 years ago. Please explain the genesis of Irrigreen and the idea behind it.
To be very fair, 6 years ago, I showed up. Gary had already, my partner in this, who's this inkjet printer, crazy inkjet printer savant. He has 40 patents in that to go through. He had been, working, in his basement and these places, working on taking inkjet printers and then printing water. So scaling that up 3 orders of magnitude to be able to create an irrigation product out of what essentially was the software and hardware for an inkjet printer. And I saw that. And first of all, my favorite inventions are always one where you take something from a completely different field that you would never think would be applicable and just cross it all the way across the streams into somewhere where it doesn't belong and come up with something that just is absolutely brand new. Probably, if you were a sprinkler company, you weren't sitting there and going, what can we learn from inkjet printing when you make your next generation product?
Just looking at the piece of paper that comes out going, I wonder.
So I really credit him with that piece. And so from my perspective, as soon as we understood, we had been working with the Center for Irrigation Technology at Fresno State. And as soon as we understood the sort of the water saving potential for this technology, it was pretty easy to kind of put my product manager hat on and just go, okay, who needs this product? Where are the places where water is expensive? And then what do the economics look like? And as we kind of brought that back, we were like, the ROIs on this would be about 2x what you'd get putting solar panels on your house. And Gary at that time had already started filing for all the patents. And it was clear to me that the ultimate power for this tool was to really make this thing internet connected, because we could connect all these various data sources and weather and models. And at the time, ML was just sort of emerging, but it was clear that, that would have a role to sort of create these sort of fire and forget ways to take care of crops, where every single square inch got exactly the right amount of water and got exactly the right amount of nutrition. And so that's kind of where I took one look at that, understood, hey, look, Gary, are you willing to have this be like an internet first product? And he certainly was. That was part of the piece. And from there, it was just like, okay, I understood how difficult this product was going to be to build. Deep tech is not a place where, in 2 years, you've got the perfect product. So as long as we were able to trench in and take the time to actually go through and get the full end-to-end system, we knew we'd have something that would have significant potential in the market. And also, the fundamentals of a company with some really interesting proprietary technology.
You just made me think that there's such an interesting kind of round trip that you go on, that great product design is really simple and looks really easy because it's kind of either visually intuitive or whatever. Like you see it and then it's like, well, how the hell has that not been the way that this has always been done? But the journey to go through to get to that product is completely wild. And I feel like you're such a great example of that. Do you want to just sort of give us an idea of what those early product cycles were like? How does a product that is as good as your Gen 3, for example, just reflect on how difficult it is to get made and how easy it looks once it's done?
Part of this is like to be humble and just talk about the things that we screwed up at the beginning. All these things, you think you have these things in place and you see the end product and you're like, oh, duh, that's what it looks like. Don't understand all the little journeys and steps that took to get to these basic pieces. For example, one piece that we had that took a long time to understand, particularly for like homeowner customers, was that the water savings was important, but it wasn't the first most important thing to them.
You wish it was more.
Or the second most important thing to them. What they wanted is they wanted this landscaping that really made their home feel like a home that their kids and their pets could play on. And they wanted that, that solved in a way that was beautiful and then that was green. And by the way, they did the right thing for the environment and they saved a lot on their water bills. But it took, our marketing was completely backwards for a long time until we started talking to these folks and go, oh, this is a much better sprinkler system. That's what it is. They don't have the dry patches. They don't have the swampy patches. They're not spraying on their car and their sidewalk. It was a lot more of these sort of immediate sort of, gut kind of emotional reasons you buy this sort of thing. And water savings was kind of like the last thing or the way I talked my spouse into spending the money to buy it.
Absolutely.
And that took an entire flip of, I got that one wrong. And sort of sitting there and having the, so we talk about what's good product management. Good product management is listening to your customers and trying to leave your preconceived notions about how you built this thing and why it's the greatest in the world behind, and really have the humbleness to sort of take that information back and change what you're doing. I think about, I'd say a quarter of companies I work with don't talk to their customers hardly at all.
Right.
And then, the other half probably talk to their customers, but then come back in the room and decide why the customers are crazy and they really know better than they do.
They were weird.
And it's really only that little slice that kind of really sit down and really like listen to those customers and go, I'm going to change what engineering is working on this quarter. based on what we're hearing right now from the folks that are using our product that, we have the ability to delight.
And does that go all the way to the words that you use as you're thinking about the marketing to it, both spoken word and written word, literally on the website and in the copy and kind of all the rest of it? How do you actually take the language? Because the articulation of the value proposition, both implicit and explicit, how do you rip that out? How do you make it kind of manifest around the product?
The copy that we come up with to sell this thing that's going to be great, almost always, in my opinion, underperforms listening to your customers and hearing the words they say to talk about your product. Things like, the lawn of your dreams. These were things we heard customers say that performed really well when we actually looked at the analytics and things like that behind them compared to a lot of the things that we thought would work or the things that we thought would put there. So I think listening to your, every company you have, there's this wonderful moment, if it grows pretty well, where you're somewhere at a conference and you're on the escalator and somebody in front of you is talking about your company that you don't know.
Yes.
And I just encourage you, first of all, if that starts happening, that's a huge moment. Go have a beer, celebrate. You walked across somebody talking about you. That's huge. Same thing, online, it's easier to find. So it's a little earlier there. So it's not quite as big a party, but sitting there and really listening to how they're talking about you and how you fit in the sort of mental space of the market is incredibly important for what you build, how you think about engaging those customers, how you decide, that they're, to take their precious time so that they would consider something new like a startup, because it's always going to be new and risky and not the way that the problem is normally solved when you start out. And you're going to need all of that because startups are fundamentally hard. And getting product market fit and growing is fundamentally hard. And you need every single thing on your side. And even then, you're going to stumble sometimes.
I think we've got to get down to what you change. So can you just take a second so say I have a lawn that needs a sprinkler or whatever it is, some landscaping that needs to be irrigated in some way. What was life like before? And what is life like now? Because a whole bunch of other stuff comes out of that in terms of channel, value prop, all this kind of other things that I really want to get into.
When I was in high school, I used to repair and install irrigation systems. And the way you did it then in the 1990s is you dug all these trenches around your yard and you put all the plastic pipe in and you put 40 to 50 of these little sprinkler heads that sprayed in different mechanical patterns and they had springs and gizmos in them. And you did a bunch of math to make sure the pipes all had the same pressure and all the heads overlapped each other in the right way. And you got done with this sort of monstrosity that, every spring would come through and a few heads would break and it would spray on your sidewalk and everything else like that. And by the time I'd lost track of that and 25 years had passed and I went back and I'm like, what is the state of the art for sprinkler systems? It's still that.
Oh my God.
Just if you look across the kind of whole landscape of things that, mechanical things that have been displaced by software, this was one area of the world where that hadn't happened. It was still springs and gizmos and, the sprinkler dance going on there. And at the same time, we were also kind of backing into an incredible water problem, especially in the West and the South in this country, where, the Colorado River didn't have the same amount of water in it. And that was fights going on to split that up, and desal technologies run by natural gas that had huge climate concerns about them. The thought there was, if you change this from a mechanical spraying thing to a digital printing thing, you could not only save about half the water for the same crop growth or the same grass growth, but you could also make something that was just fundamentally much simpler if it was digital. And so by having one of these digital heads in the center, you could eliminate 8 to 10 of those other heads. You could eliminate 80% of the trenching, which is the really bad work that you have to do to put these things in. And so you could make more money for the contractors. If you're a homeowner, I'm only managing 5 heads, not 40, and take something that really is not one of the people's favorite parts of having their house is their irrigation system, to something that's just much more precise, much more refined, and much less wasteful. And at the same time, giving you the green and the beauty and the thing that you want, while still be mindful of resources and easy on your wallet when your water bill comes.
You've mentioned the agricultural implications. I'm just wondering how you think about your sort of largest vision? Like, what does this look like if it all goes right?
I mean, if you go back, like, I'm a computer nerd, so I always played those like civilization games when, growing up and things like that as well.
I was more of a red alert person.
And do you remember when you like discovered like irrigated agriculture? You could build the biggest armies and you could go after people and stuff like that as well. Like it was this huge leap in saying, so like agriculture and us watering plants is like such a fundamental part of like humanity and culture and food and recreation and things like this as well. So irrigation itself is this huge problem that gets so much less attention, especially from like the very best in technology than other things we think about. But it's so core to who we are as like a species.
So profound.
The thought is, okay, well, what if you could get exactly the right amount of water? What if you could get exactly the right amount of nutrition to every square inch of that just perfectly? What if you could take all the data that you had, you could put that in the cloud, you could run the very best models, and you could do that in a way that's fire and forget? How much better would that be? And how many people could live more comfortably if that was done in such an optimal way? And I think that problem itself, from ornamental things and landscaping all the way up through food, is just such an interesting problem to get up in the morning and work on, and has such an opportunity to kind of do good and recruit other really smart people that want to do good too. That puts a big smile on my face and gets me working hard at Irrigreen.
It seems like an odd question. How do you think about your own company? How do you classify yourself? A lot of people would look at what this is and say, oh, you're a consumer company. Are you?
I don't totally look at it us that way. I think it's important, especially for very new ideas that don't really have a lot of analogs, to kind of reach directly to the end customer to have a conversation first. Because channels, in many cases, are designed to kill startups. So if you look at like a Powerwall for Tesla, when that product came out, there was a very intentional part to talk to homeowners about what would it be like to have these sets of batteries in your garage, and what would that allow you? What sort of freedoms could that allow you? And that part was built out before the channel part was built out. You buy it online on Tesla, or you'd buy it at a Tesla showroom or something else like that before the channel really kicked in to go through there. So I think it's important to have this relationship with the end customer, because it helps you develop the right product that works right for them, and then bring in the channel and the other pieces like that to kind of come through. So I would describe us, really, we're a water tech, we're a climate tech company, and we're a deep tech company. We're kind of a combination of like robotics and climate tech. And the expression of that product is very much this beautiful consumer thing, right? That has to resonate with that customer. So it's really important that we have these direct conversations with that customer, but ultimately we'll be driven through those channels, through the contractors, through the small businesses, through the people that deploy this. But in order for it, because it's so new and so different, it has to have that end customer. Oh, okay, yes, I want the digital one. I don't want the old mechanical one. There has to be that sort of pull in case to get those big flywheel channels going.
In terms of the position, because there's always an interesting division, right? Is that when you go through a channel, who are you actually selling to? And what you've done is really, I think, really helpfully articulate that actually, no, you need to work backwards from the people who use it. You can't treat your channel as your customer, even though they're the people who are kind of giving you the money and then getting the money from the customers, because there has to be this like straight up relationship. How did that inform your kind of overall brand positioning? How did you think about it? Because part of the brand for the contractors is that, look, this is way faster and in the end will be way simpler, and you're going to be able to monitor it from miles away, and you're going to be able to do a much more with much less. And then for the customers, it's something very different. So squaring that circle, how did you think about it in terms of brand?
I think for the very important thing is like, it's very important to me that like for the end customer, they're like, I'm getting Irrigreen, I'm getting the best one. Like I'm getting the premium product. So I think if I had to talk brand importance, that's the most important brand for me, as this is the best one. On the contractor side, I think it's a little more practical. It's a little more like, can you keep your brand promise in terms of this being a third the labor to install? Can I get it in? Is it the easiest one? Do I put it in there? And also, does it have that reputation for reliability? Like I'm putting my brand on the line when I install an Irrigreen thing, because my professional reputation, I'm the doctor and I just prescribed Irrigreen if you're a landscape contractor. So like, is this going to be good enough for me? And that's where the branding comes in for the professional channels. So I think that's where it fits for me first. And I think the you're getting the best one, right? You're getting this promise around efficiency. You're getting this promise around precision. You're getting this promise around the very best landscaping and the greenest. Those are the things that are most important to me.
Can you talk a little bit about the depth of your value proposition? I'm just going to say the difference in shelf space required to you, because that's what I'm thinking of. I don't know whether that even played into your thinking, but I was so struck by like this. Anyway, you say what I mean, because I'm just interested in this idea of this like clouds parting, and suddenly it feels like these value props are aligning way down in ways that maybe perhaps slightly unexpected or maybe very expected. I'm not sure.
There's about 100 different directions we can go from here. But just one is like, just to start out with a scratch, and then we can take this anywhere you want. It's like, if you think about what's required to build an irrigation system now, it's these sort of almost analog computer of all these different little mechanical things that spray 70 degrees and 90 degrees and this distance and this pressure. So that like all these specialty suppliers have like tens of thousands of SKUs that are necessary in order to basically get all the different shapes for a yard and be able to puzzle piece them together to create a system that probably, we'll talk about, even in the best case, doesn't perform that well. And the idea of taking all that variance that's now in hardware and putting it in software. So we just sell one printer, one of these digital robotic heads that essentially will print out in any shape. And the SKU count just collapses from, we sell one head. Later on, we may sell 3, not 1,000. And so just kind of thinking about, how does that have the potential to change industries as those shifts come through? What's important and what's not important for our contractor? The idea that they can have a couple of these things on their truck and they've always got the right spare part. So just little things like that in terms of, how you change the dynamics and the market forces around an industry are really, really interesting as you think about business models and as you think about what are the leverage points in order to be able to grow something at venture scale.
And one of the things I think you've done so well is that, like, the articulation of that, and the fact that it was, coming from your customer at the time and giving your customer, the contractor, that kind of voice to walk you through what it's like to actually engage with this product. For whatever reason, I think it's like the anti-Jaws. We're going to need a bigger boat. We're going to need a smaller warehouse. This is what we need. I want to take, because you're a real operator. And I think a lot of that is in there with the nuts and bolts of company building. So I want to shift gears a little bit into kind of the internal running of Irrigreen. And one of the things that really struck me from the very beginning is that you've really run a board before. You've really dealt with and really are sort of next level professional with the overall running of the company. How do you reflect on the kind of the importance of boards, how boards can be well run, any advice for other founders to do this?
I mean, I think the first part is, first understand that a board's a team. So overall, you're trying to build a board in very similar ways that you're trying to build a team, and that you're trying to find what are the pieces when we actually talk through strategy. Who are the people that we want to have around the room in order to be able to have the most interesting discussions there that lead to or help lead to building the very best company in the very shortest time. From that, and if you think of them as your team members, then it's sort of like, how do you need to treat those team members? And the first one is, how do you get them a lot of information before the board meeting so that they don't just show up kind of cold on that to, they've read through something that you sent 24 hours in advance or something else like that. So how do you kind of keep them in the loop so they're warmed up on the company so that when you get into that board meeting or something else like that, you can work on the most urgent, most interesting growth problems or team problems or other pieces like that you really are looking for your next unlock. And what that means, to a large degree is it's old fashioned, but you just got to pick up the phone. You have to kind of keep these folks in the loop and along for the ride, kind of for the good news and the other things you're thinking about, but especially for the bad news in terms of like what's going on, what you're thinking about, and kind of like, if they have a little pulse on like what you're thinking and what you're worried about, that helps them so much in terms of like, especially when I'm a board member, right? It's sort of like, okay, I know what the CEO for this company I'm on the board for is kind of working through and everything else like that. So I'm going to think about, how can I support him? What are the ways that I can show up better? Because I know this is a problem. And if I got something out of left field or something else like that, I'll kind of know how to pitch it out or something like that. Or if I'm like, oh, I see how the company's performing and I kind of know how he's thinking about it. So there could be something here that we're missing. I've got a little more time to sort of be more thoughtful about how to bring that up and go, hey, take a look over here. This might be something interesting for you. So I think that whole idea of treat them as team members and bring them along for the journey, the whole journey, not just the quarterly board meeting or something else like that. I find you get so much more value out of your board. The second thing is ask for what you need. So many people are like, here's my report card. Can I go home now? Right. And it's like, use your board members, right? There's a reason why all these people were chosen, you're chosen to put on this team. Can you think about, hey, this is an area where I could use some help? What do you have in here? What do you have in here that could help me out? Or not necessarily, do you have that piece of information? But more often than not, it's like the who. Who do you know that's hit a problem like this before? Who do you know that's had a portfolio company that's had a situation like this? Who do you know that, those pieces as well? And if you use that, I find that, tremendously helpful.
But just to put myself in the founder's shoes for a second, I mean, often the asks come, but then I know that the investors and board members or board members and observers' reaction sort of is fairly supine, let's say, right? You're quite good at making sure that the thing that needs to happen is at very worst, you chase down the, I'm really sorry, I don't know anyone. Is this also to do with kind of like direct communication?
Yeah, any board member is going to be very successful, so they're probably going to be pretty busy. So to poke on that, but I think there's also a little bit of an idea of like you kind of know who the go-tos on your board are for different areas, right? Like you've kind of put together the team. You're sort of like, okay, I know if I've got a supply chain. In my case, if I know if I got a supply chain thing, I'm going to go to Brian because he knows tons about supply chain or anything else like that as well. And so I think if you've got a board member in a particular area and you've got an ask in that area, it's okay to kind of scratch a little bit and go, hey, could you just double click on that one more time and see if you could get me some more intros here? Because this is really one that I go through and kind of you're the guy on the board that this is your area.
We're going into them now. Yeah, let's do this.
And to tell you the truth, I've really rarely had a problem where and also if someone's dead wood on the board and they're just really not providing any value there, I think then that's an opportunity to just sit there and go, hey, there's probably a company they're more interested in. There's probably a more valuable board member that can come in and kind of help out there. And there's probably a really good way to sit there and go, okay, there's a transition point here where it makes sense to have a better fit.
So we're coming back to Sean Ellis and the growth marketing side of things. Like the best way I can think about it is that I see you as you just understand the levers and you understand the levers, but crucially, you've been able to build a control panel in a way that I think is relatively rare, especially for obviously like first-time founders, like the first time they're doing this and they're sort of like just figuring it out. And I'd love for you to unpack a little bit of your insight into kind of the growth marketing kind of black sheet. Where do you think people should be thinking about this?
Yeah. And I don't pretend we have any of this figured out because growth marketing is really hard. I think the biggest part that kind of comes in is like a fundamental distrust that you can just have a feeling for it and get it right. Like that real commitment to high velocity experimentation would be the thing that I would give folks the most credit on there. And again, you can get this wrong a little bit too in that stage. Most people don't do enough data or they don't do enough experimentation. But the other part would be really talking to the customers and using those qualitative insights to drive the hypotheses for the experiments that you're going to end up getting data around. Because there's not enough time in a startup before you run out of money to experiment on everything. So you have to kind of like figure out where you're placing your bets. So, I guess the two main things I would carry is think about where you have your list of bets that you want to make in terms of what you think is going to drive growth. Think very carefully about how you can do high velocity experiments around those, and then have some kind of ranking system for what are the most important things to test. And you can use like, ICE framework, some of those pieces. There's lots of different frameworks out there. The most important thing is to pick one so you can kind of have an idea of what's our list on how we're actually going to get data on how we get better here.
When you're running experiments, how do you know when to stop?
If you do this in the right way, you should know exactly where stat sig is. And I think for startups, if you get into the low 90s, that's probably as good as you're going to do in terms of understanding statistical significance for this. And in some cases, like you're going to have to make some calls on some things that are in the 80s. I think more than anything else, it's just understanding when am I making a data-driven decision because I have enough data, and when do I not have enough data? And, we're having this conversation where any rudimentary statistics will show us we just don't, there isn't a signal here yet. And doing the math on that is pretty, if you have ChatGPT will do the math for you. But don't worry if you're not a statistics major. A lot of the marketing tools will do it for you. But just kind of be mindful of for any experiment you do, how that will run. And ideally, most of your experiments, you're going to want to have a signal back in 2 weeks. Because you're a startup, you really just can't take things light. So when you think about those experiments, or even think about what I'm prioritizing testing, part of what comes in, in the ICE framework is how easy is that? And part of how easy is it is how long is this test going to have to sit out there before we have any idea whether this is better than what we're currently doing?
Well, one of the pieces of infrastructure that allows you to do a whole bunch of different tests is your new production facility in the Midwest. Can you just talk us through the logic, the process? What does it allow you to do? What principles did you employ as you were setting it up? Because it is mighty impressive.
Part of this is if you really want to build that brand of quality, you can't test on your customers. When you're a very small startup, you can do a little bit of that just because, there's one or two people and it's your aunt, your uncle that you put it in their backyard or something else like that you can go through. But as soon as you get to scale, and if you really want to explore the space, one of my first jobs was as building semiconductors, doing chip design. And the penalty for having a bug in a chip design is you got to buy another $1 million, $2 million mask. So you just test in a very different way. And so we're always thinking about, okay, how can we create an environment where we can be fearless in how fast we change software? Because the verification system, the automated verification systems we have put together will help catch these bugs before they go to customers. And it's a quality piece, but the part that most people miss, it's sort of like a invention velocity hack, is having really good verification. And so you go into one of our warehouses and you'll see 40 of these sprinkler heads out doing continuous testing with, Python scripts banging away at them, making them do all sorts of things in there, to the end of is that last software version that we put out correct? And can we push that to the entire field? Or is this mechanical change or this new sprinkler we're coming out with, is that good enough yet that it's ready for customers? And only through really good automation and having those things out there can you answer those questions. And it's expensive and it takes time, and it is totally worth it because you can just build products at a much higher velocity if you really think about verification first.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. And then the last piece before we get to our kind of two little coders, you're as deliberate as anyone I've ever seen around hiring. When I first experienced it, I was like, what? There's hire slowly and then there's whatever this is, it was extraordinary. But actually in retrospect, and having got to know some of the people that come at the end of that process, I mean, I'm joking, right? You're not taking the piss and taking kind of 18 months to do this or whatever it is, but you really made me understand what that meant. Did you feel like you had to get over the hurdles of your own impatience? Is this the fact that your N is now very high of hiring the right people that you've really internalized? Or is this something that you were good at straight away? How do you think about it?
Every single startup I've done, I focus more and more on how to get the hiring right, especially with the E team. It is the biggest determinant of success that you can have. And it's, in terms of levers, the outcome. So if you're thinking about, as a CEO, how much time you're spending on various aspects of your job, I would encourage everyone to double click on how can I spend more time on hiring, particularly if it's for senior roles. Because the difference between getting someone there that is excellent versus someone there that is just good is just such a dramatic multiplier on outcomes for the company. And really selecting that group so they work well as a team is also something that is another, a great team, especially a great executive team, can take a company and just scale it so much faster, reduce so much risk. So I really do believe in over-indexing on hiring. And it probably took me 2 startups to really learn that.
It's one of those things you always think you're doing it enough, and you very rarely are in terms of taking enough time. It's quite extreme to do it right. Who are your entrepreneurial touchstones? What should other founders be reading, in your opinion?
I'm a big sort of Steve Blank devotee.
Okay. Keeping it close to home.
So it's a thick, rough book, but that startup owner's manual, It is not, I'm sorry, Steve, it's not the best written book in the world, but there are just such gold in there.
He will be 10.
As an easier one, like Nail It and Then Scale It is a really nice, Getting to Plan B. Those are a couple ones that are a little bit easier and digestible to go through. I think there are, I think the lean startup stuff has some really interesting information. I'm not a complete devotee because I do believe
there's good enough and then there's water's good enough, right?
There is a time for both.
Yeah.
And understanding how to apply that, at some point you want to build the best in the world. And there's slightly different techniques for that. But those are some of the ones that I really have been inspired by.
Shane, I already cannot wait for the next time that we do this. And I sort of wish that we'd booked more during our hopscotch time. But it is time for our final question that we ask all of our guests on the fundamental molecule. What is the single most important piece of advice for future and aspiring water entrepreneurs?
I think it comes down to really, really understanding the customer at a fundamental level and using that as the driver for a lot of the decisions you make through your company. This is something that's put out there before, but really, really understanding their pain, what they're using today, and how you might delight them. There's so much noise in these markets, and startups are so hard to make go that unless that fundamental sort of, customer as your North Star is there early on and continues to be there, I think it's just too hard to build these things.
Phenomenal. It was a great way to end. Shane, this was exactly as fun as I thought it would be. Thank you so much for coming on the Fundamental Molecule.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Great to see you, sir.
Happy to do it again.
Cheers, then.